right, it is 1:02, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending our NVLA Drive webinar on the 2026 Executive Cyber Risk Playbook, What Smart Leaders Will Do Before Q2. So thank you very much to our presenters for being here with us today. Before we get started, I am going to turn it over to the NVLA President, Tarry Shebesta, who is going to do a brief introduction for us. So Terry, take it away.
Great, Suzanne. Thank you. And thank you for everybody joining us today. And today we are joined by Rob Schenk. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Intelligent Technical Solutions. Rob works directly with leadership teams to align technology, security, and operations so organizations can scale without adding unnecessary complexity. So as we head into 2026 now, cyber risk is accelerating, as we've all seen in our industries. Attacks are faster, threat actors are smarter, insurance requirements are higher, and exposure across cloud, SaaS, and third-party platforms continues to grow. Today's session is focused on giving business leaders clarity on how to protect revenue and operations without getting buried in technical detail. So, Rob, glad to have you with us today, and floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Tara. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the members out there, and looking forward to having a great conversation today. So as Terry mentioned, I'm Rob Schenk with Intelligent Technical Solutions, and we help small and medium-sized businesses thrive by managing and securing their technology. So a few housekeeping notes before we kind of get into it too much. The conversation should run about 25, 30 minutes or so. We'll stick around to answer some questions at the end. Conversation will be recorded, so if you'd like to review this at a later date, you'll be able to do so. Happy to take questions during the conversation, so please go ahead and submit them in the chat, and we'll be able to answer those as we go here. All right, so you'll notice a QR code in the lower right corner, and that's going to lead to an offer for attendees of the webinar. In case you need to leave early or anything, you might want to take a scan of that for later. For today's discussion, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Patrick Curtin. Pat is with Field Effect. He's an executive with over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity and networking. He's worked in a variety of cybersecurity roles, spanning public and private public and private sectors, including 4 years leading an enterprise security operations center. So with that, I'd like to welcome Pat to the conversation, and we'll be kind of leading today's discussion.
Thanks very much, Rob. Looking forward to this important conversation.
Alrighty. Well, to get started here, let's just a quick review. So we're going to talk about the landscape that we all face in 2026. You know, how these security breaches happen, the range of kind of costs and the impact that organizations will incur, and from there we'll start to examine what it takes to bring an organization to what we call cyber resilience, and how to start that journey. So you can better protect yourself and your data. So let's maybe talk through the threat landscape that we find ourselves now. It seems like you can't turn on the news these days without hearing about the latest cyber threat, cyber attack. We hear about deep fakes. We hear about AI, ransomware, business email compromise, phishing, and so forth. So maybe Pat, you can let's level set here. And what are you seeing out in the wild these days?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot. My company, Field Effect, we're involved in defending about 5,000 organizations as of today. And so we're very much in the thick of this fight against cybercrime. And unfortunately, it's really never been worse. And there's a few reasons for that. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just going to lay out, what we see. And first of all, there's a wide variety of attackers. It used to be we would worry about master hackers, people who really knew what they're doing. Increasingly, the attackers aren't in that category. So the cybercrime is broadening. And part of the reason for that is the barrier to entry has never been lower, in that pretty much anyone can access incredibly sophisticated cyber attack tools and, in fact, entire cyber attack suites with everything needed. All you have to do is cough up a few $100s a month and you have access to that. And then if that isn't bad enough, you have AI coming along, and there has been a lot of hype around AI, and we could talk forever about that just alone. but there's no question it is removing the barrier to speed and scale. It isn't necessarily introducing novel attacks. There's a lot of very successful attacks people can use, but it is accelerating the attacks that are happening. So one threat actor can go after a lot of people at the same time. And really, the upshot of all this is that the climate for ransomware and business email compromise is really bad. And those are the two things that organizations need to really worry about. Um, so, it's bad. But one little piece of good news here is that it is all preventable. If you're doing the right things, you can stop this stuff cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of examples I can bring up. Like today, just a couple hours ago, I saw something come up on my news feed that Nike got hit. Very large breach there. No details yet, but that's just from a couple of hours ago. Power School is from 1 year ago, and it is basically the largest educational hack in history. Okay. Power School is a provider to school boards all across the United States and Canada. And basically, the sensitive information of about 70 million people, students and teachers, was released in one go. So that's, social insurance numbers or social security numbers. That is medical data, disciplinary data, a lot of sensitive stuff. And the hacker in this case was caught. They often don't get caught, but in this case, the hacker was a not very talented 19-year-old living in Massachusetts. He's pictured in the lower right at his sentencing. He's going to jail for 4 years. He didn't get any money out of his breach, but still very, very damaging. Okay. And that's kind of an example of what's happening nowadays. It's not just those cybercrime gangs that we've always been worried about. It's these people that with no background in it who are able to come in and prosecute, in this case, the worst educational attack in history.
And we're also seeing some pretty nefarious tactics that they're leveraging. So I think we've talked about, I think it was a Clark County, I think it was, that we could talk through that example about some of the, I guess, unscrupulous ways that these hackers will go ahead and really try and leverage information to go ahead and get those extortions out there. Maybe you could talk through that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, not to dwell too much on education, but there's this other terrible example. Clark County in Nevada, fifth largest school board in the country, they got breached. And again, it was a pretty comprehensive breach, lost all kinds of data. And in that particular case, the cyber criminals didn't contact the school board. They started contacting parents. So I'm sure you can appreciate, I actually talked to one parent involved in that and just how scary and damaging that is, if to nothing else but trust, right? So the cyber criminals really have no morals whatsoever. They will go after anything that moves to try and make a buck.
So let's talk about how this actually gets started. So let's talk through, how a typical attack, well, how it emanates, how it gets started. And I hear like a large percentage of attacks are initiating at this point, like a large number of them are coming in through kind of email and phishing related vectors. Maybe you can talk through that a little bit.
Absolutely. So people always want to know how these things happen. And, let's start with how they start. So the number one category by far are identity attacks. And identity attacks are really just a fancy way of saying that people are using legitimate credentials and they are logging in, they are not hacking in, right? So the way they get those credentials there's a bit of variety there. I mean, phishing, it used to be phishing was about getting you to click on something that would trigger malware. That's not that common these days because it's pretty easy to stop. It's more often about tricking you into giving up your password. So it might be something about your SharePoint, something about your M365 as examples. Those are common, and they inject fear, they inject urgency, saying you got to get into your SharePoint right now or your access is going to be terminated, and it'll trick you into giving up your password. Um, they're starting to use things like LinkedIn, um, Teams invitations, Google Calendar invites. So not even using traditional email vectors, but using anything else to get a link in front of you. And on top of that, they'll also do things like social engineering with help desks. They'll call up a help desk, pretend they're you, try to get a password reset, that kind of thing. So that's the biggest category, right? It's not the only category.
And
Um,
the social engineering attack that you brought up, a good example of that is if you might remember the MGM casino hack from about a year and a half ago. Those hackers basically socially engineered the help desk and got into that system. They were inside that network for roughly about a week before they went ahead and ransomwared the environment as well. So it's like they're targeting, folks that are managing the accounts as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so vulnerable systems, this is another big category. This is, um, vulnerable firewalls and VPN appliances. Those devices have had incredible vulnerabilities exposed, which you need to patch. You need to update the software on those things, and those often get missed. And they provide an easy way for cyber criminals to know what they're doing. Right? You need more skill to pull this off. But that's another big category. And finally, undefended systems like um, a laptop that doesn't have endpoint protection on it, or a system where endpoint protection was turned off or never got installed in the first place. Those are ripe for the picking too. So there's a lot of different ways in. Um, Good news from there, typically the adversary playbooks are very well known. There's a set number of things they're going to want to do. They're going to want to establish persistence. They're going to want to escalate their privileges. They're going to want to move around the network and start stealing data. And all of those things that I just said are observable. They're all things that if you're looking for them, if a system is looking for them, they can be spotted. Now, I'm making it sound really easy. It's not that easy. It is hard to do that. But if you know what you're doing on the defense side, you can do that.
Yeah. So let's go through a little bit of some of the practicalities. So, like, what are the hard costs that a business is going to face when they get hit by a serious attack? Because there's a lot of different hard costs that folks may not be aware of. So maybe just let's educate them on that.
Absolutely. So just quickly, the hard costs are what people tend to fixate on. It's the dollars out the door to bring in external help. Like even the largest companies that get breached uh, tend to have to bring outside help in because they don't have all the expertise they need to dig themselves out of that hole. Staff overtime is pretty big. You're going to be buying additional hardware and software. You might be bringing in extra legal help, communications help. You might have to offer up credit monitoring if you've lost sensitive data of your clients. Like those social security numbers. You're going to be offering up credit monitoring, and then you might have ended up having to pay a ransom as well. So those are all examples of money directly out the door, right? Um, Arguably, those aren't even the biggest costs. You think of in the private sector when you get ransomware and your systems get locked up, you can't actually carry on business the way you want to carry on business. And we've seen lots of examples of this. I guess Rob, you had a front row seat to the car dealership story. If you wanted to shed some light on that.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with the CDK attack from mid last year. You had 15,000 dealerships affected nationwide. That was considered I guess, a supply chain attack where if a third party partner got compromised, but they were an application line of business application that many dealerships used, and a lot of the dealerships that were impacted by that ended up going back to pen and paper for going on almost 3 to 4 weeks. Kind of cost the industry, I think, over $1 billion. Um, and that was a very kind of direct to a lot of dealerships. Impact was pretty significant. I guess the other thing too is if you think about uh, how much cash on hand a business has, because the average ransomware related event is bringing down a business for multiple weeks. I think it's like 16 business days on average. A lot of businesses only have, a couple of weeks of potentially cash on hand to be able to deal with the ongoing, day to day, got to do payroll, got to go ahead and do all these various costs that you have. And a lot of companies are getting caught flat footed by that. And that really also causes significant impact. Maybe you can kind of comment on that as well a little bit, Pat.
I mean, the impacts are huge, right? And whether it's private sector or public sector, public sector, it's about just locking up operations and people not being able to deliver education, deliver municipal services, and so on. So all of those impacts are huge, right? You layer in the loss of sensitive data. This all leads to a loss of reputation and trust, right? Where it takes years to build up a reputation and build trust with a client base, and it can be lost awfully quickly. Now, um, interestingly, I've talked to a lot of people who've been through this, and the number one cost they highlight is the last bullet there, the the stress around one of these situations, because it is existential. Smaller businesses in particular um, are at particular risk of grinding to a halt and having to wind up shop, right? And unfortunately, there are too many examples of that, right? So it's very, very stressful on everyone involved. No one wants to ever go through it again. And I think all too often people think, geez, what could we have done differently?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely one of the, if you talk to like, some of the business people that I've talked to that have gone through this, it's like they'll, hey, this is one of the worst days of their business life that they've gone through. So let's talk through common myths that we often hear. Can you go ahead and maybe review some of these? Let's have a discussion around that.
Sure. So, one of them is, hey, we're already well protected. We have antivirus, we have a firewall, we have endpoint detection and response, EDR. We're protected. And unfortunately, for the attacks we're seeing today, this just isn't true. You need a multi-layer approach beyond this to really achieve resilience. We're going to get into that. We have backups. We're good. Don't get me wrong, backups are great. That's another one we're going to talk about in a bit. But backups are going to help you in this case, dig yourself out from that hole. They're not going to prevent all of those costs and bad things from happening, right? Um, and the same thing with cyber insurance. We have cyber insurance, we're going to survive. It's an after the fact thing. So, you know, we all, have car insurance. We don't want to get in car accidents, right? Cyber insurance is really there to lessen the blow and to help you get back on your feet. It's not going to prevent those negative things from happening, and it usually does not cover loss of revenue, as an example. Um, we'll quickly know if something is wrong. This is really not the case. Typically, if a threat actor gets inside and starts moving around, a victim organization's first hint that something is really wrong is when they get the ransom note. Um, and it isn't, you got to try and stop them as early on in the process as possible is the truth there. And so finally, we're too small. No one's going to bother with us. And this is a natural reaction, right? Because we see all the stories, and the stories are about, those casinos, or about Nike, or, United Healthcare, or, Land Rover over in the UK, massive one. Those are newsworthy stories, but they're going after any organization online, right? Um, because it's just all about the dollars, and they can still get a lot of money out of a large number of small and medium businesses, right? So no one is immune to this.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of this is we had a company come to us in the middle of a crisis. They were actually a small CPA firm, and one of their principals had gotten his password compromised, and they went ahead and the hacker submitted a bunch of fraudulent tax return requests to the IRS, and think about actually 185 fraudulent tax return requests and refund requests.
Mm.
If you think about from a small CPA firm, what would be the impact of uh, you know, s- you're in business to go ahead and transact with your CPA clients, and if you're going ahead and submitting fraudulent tax returns to the IRS, it's not going to end up in a good spot. So the IRS got wind of that and then went ahead and blacklisted the CPA firm. And it took them about a year and a half to get out from under all of that. They lost a bunch of clients, they had to rebuild a lot of trust, and they basically rebuilt their client base. So the impact can be, again, small CPA firm, 6 people, impact can be pretty destructive. I think the other thing I'll mention too is that if you think about the hacker gets in, and what do they do when they get into the system? Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to move what we call laterally. So they're trying to get into other accounts. They're trying to elevate and escalate their privilege. So they're trying to get to what we call administrative level of control. And when they get to administrative levels, they can delete backups. They can go ahead and monitor emails. They can go ahead and suck data out of the network, which they'll go ahead and use as leverage to go ahead and extort you at the end of the day. Now, what's interesting is that the time that they've been in the system before they actually launch a ransomware as event, as Pat mentioned. That time has gotten smaller and smaller as the time has gone on. So 2 to 3 years ago, it was 6 to 9 months. 2 years ago, 2 to 3 months. We had the incident with MGM Grand that was less than a week. The latest is I'm hearing hours um, before they go ahead and ransomware you. So then businesses, you have your window of noticing that somebody is in your network is getting smaller and smaller. And basically that's leading us to like, okay, well, what do we do now? Right. And that's leading to what we call cyber resilience. So maybe Pat, you can go ahead and talk about that a little bit. How does a business start to protect itself, and where do we go from here?
Sure. And just to begin there, when we talk about resilience, we're not talking about perfection. We're talking about being able to withstand bad things, right? So that if someone in your organization makes a mistake, clicks on a link they shouldn't, enters a password, hopefully it gets stopped, right? But if it doesn't, maybe it's a bad day for that employee, but not for the whole organization. Unfortunately, though, these stories we're seeing, resilience wasn't there. One breach leads to a massive breach, and then possibly game over, right? So now there is no one thing that will get you to cyber security resilience. We really look at it in these three pillars of people, process, and technology. So on the people side, it starts with awareness. This is awareness right now. It's about training employees to recognize ways that the cyber threat actors, these cyber criminals, are going to try and get in through them, right? It's about educating leaders about the risks they're facing. And part of it is also about arming people. There are things you can do to equip individual employees with, for example, a way to determine if an email is malicious or not through an Outlook plugin, right? Um, Secondly, you want to promote this idea of cybersecurity. And I get you to think about physical security. I think everywhere people just instinctively have a sense of physical security. If you had a secure warehouse and a stranger was walking around in the warehouse, someone's going to say something, right? See something, say something. We want to get people thinking that way in terms of cybersecurity, as opposed to a climate of fear, which in a lot of places is what there is right now, or a lack of awareness. Education will help people get comfortable with the idea of, okay, here's what I'm facing, here's what I can do about it, here's who I can talk to, right? And finally, this idea of leveraging third-party expertise. Cybersecurity expertise isn't all that common. It's not that easy to find. It's very hard to retain. And it's not very easy to harness on a 24/7 basis. So increasingly, organizations are looking for outside help on this aspect of their business. Process. We love process, don't we, Rob? This is where people's eyes glaze over and they start looking at their watches. But you know, it's super important. I'll give you some examples. Offboarding of employees who have left the organization for whatever reason. There needs to be a process to decommission their accounts. Why? Well, threat actors, cyber criminals love dormant accounts, love using them, less likely to get noticed, right? Um, Decommissioning old systems, same idea. Privilege review. Rob might be in a technical role where he has those system administrator privileges, those highest level of privileges. And then he goes into an executive role where he doesn't need them anymore. Well, those privileges need to be revoked to minimize the threat surface, to keep you as safe as possible. So those are all kind of procedural process things. Um, Ongoing vulnerability management. There's a technical aspect and then a process aspect, but you need to have a process for ensuring that your systems are updated, right? This is a really, really important way to minimize the risk on each individual device. And finally, two non-technical things that are important to mention, but they're really important in today's threat environment. It's the help desk. What playbooks do they follow? And financial control. So on the help desk side, you want people to be following a process and not to be diverging from them just to be nice. And these, like that MGM example, they had playbooks. right? There was a process for them to follow. And then human nature kicks in, and the person on the phone with the sob story, um, you know, cracks your will, and next thing you know, you've thrown your process out the window and they have their window in. Financial controls, those really come in with these business email compromise attacks, where the criminal isn't really hacking. They're using an account they got into to send fake emails, and they might be sending fake invoices. They might be trying to change banking information. So the next time a legitimate invoice for a certain company comes in, the payment goes to their bank account and not the
Mm.
correct one. So you need processes around all of that. And these need to get a bit more sophisticated now, so that it's not, you don't want to be taking a phone from the CFO and it's a deep fake of the CFO. You want to be calling the CFO the way you normally would speak to them, right? So there's a number of subtleties there. And finally, oh, sorry, Rob, did you want to say anything?
Oh, yes. Go on to technology here. We're on technology now. Yep.
All right. This is where we normally live, right? We fixate on the technology. Um, Even the best cybersecurity people do need good technology to work with. Some of it is architectural, just how you set up your network, and some of it is how you're monitoring. So on the setup side, multi-factor authentication, really, really important. Preferably a newer kind, not a first generation, SMS solution, but something using Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, a hardware token like a YubiKey. That's a really, really, it can be circumvented, but it's harder, and it can stop some threat actors. Others, it's going to be a speed bump. Network segmentation, basically zoning your network to make it harder for the threat actor to move around. Backups. So, you know, threat actors, cyber criminals go after backups. They know how important they are. So you want to have a component of your backup strategy be completely offline, where it can't be touched, because in the worst case scenario, that's what you're going to rebuild from. Vulnerability management. This is the technical process of scanning your enterprise on an ongoing basis to figure out what's vulnerable, whether it's a workstation, a server, a firewall. You need to find these things before the threat actors do, because if you can find them and patch them, then it reduces what the cyber criminal can go after, right? 24/7 real-time attack detection and blocking. So those behaviors I told you about that we want to detect, you need to be looking for that stuff on a 24/7 basis. You need a system to do that. You need a system that has visibility into your enterprise and can run analytics against it, and notice things going wrong at 2 a.m. on a weekend or on Christmas Eve. One last thing I'll mention is AI. There's so much hype around AI, but threat actors are using it and defenders are using it as well. And a great use case is against something called living off the land attacks. So a living off the land attack is a very, very stealthy attack where the cyber criminals get on your network and they're not bringing any malware in. They're just going to use your own tools against you. There's enough there, they can do that if they know what they're doing. And that's super hard to spot. But, Rob doesn't normally do those kind of activities. And if I take over Rob's account and start changing mailbox rules and creating and deleting accounts and doing all of this kind of stuff Rob doesn't normally do, um, AI is very, very good at spotting that. AI is great at pattern recognition, much better than we are at humans, at the scale that is needed. And then you put all of this together, this is what's going to give you defense in depth. And defense in depth is what will give you resilience.
So really what we're talking about is there's some fundamentals that you've talked through, making sure that your systems are patched, making sure that you have this multi-factor authentication for your most important accounts, making sure that you have this real-time monitoring. So you're able to detect something as soon as it happens. And then at that point, you have the ability to respond and block, especially when things happen. Like if you think about most of the attacks, they're happening off hours, they're happening on weekends, they're happening when people are on vacation because they're in people's emails and they know when they're on vacation. So they're trying to find those most inopportune times to go ahead and leverage that account for maximum impact. So these are the kinds of things that companies at this point, kind of cost of doing business at this point, really. It's really about how do we go ahead and put in these, these layers of protection. If they get past one layer, they're getting blocked by something else, right? Almost like the analogy would be like how you would protect a house. If I want to protect a house, what do I need to do? I need to have some, good foundation to my property. I need to have some locks on the doors, locks on the windows, a fence around the property, a barking dog, alarm system, and so forth. Same kind of analogy, but applied to a computer system, right? You want to have these varying layers of protections, and if the attacker gets past one, they're getting blocked by one of the others. So it's really this defense in depth kind of scenario that you're talking about.
And Rob, actually, let me just throw something in there real quick. We've been working on fraud stacks. So it's more, instead of a tech stack, it's a fraud stack. Like you said, it's multi-layered. So the more layers you have, the better protection you have. So it's, yeah.
Alrighty. So let's talk about ways that companies can go ahead and protect themselves better. So let's say if you look at how the majority of networks are set up, most of them are going to have some protections around antivirus. They're going to have some sort of backup. They're going to have some sort of spam filter. They're going to have some sort of firewall. And as Pat was mentioning earlier, those defenses used to be able to protect us, but that was pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, what did we see? We saw people moving to work from home. We saw people leveraging cloud systems. We saw people using personal devices. And so the threat got more distributed and it extended to people's homes. And what we ended up seeing was a big spike in cyber attacks since the pandemic has started. And it's created this gap. And so now companies really need to go ahead and adjust their levels of protections in order to meet the current level of threat. As Pat has mentioned, these attacks have gotten much more sophisticated, more impactful, and the frequency is increasing. So being able to have, this kind of real-time visibility is becoming more and more crucial for businesses. And so that's what we provide with what we call ITS Secure. So that's effectively a holistic protection mechanism across an entire enterprise, and it's protecting the computers, the servers, the workstations, the laptops, but it's also protecting things that are happening in the network. So things like Wi-Fi, your mobile devices, if you're at a dealership, you're talking about diagnostic devices that a service technician might use to go ahead and work on a particular car under repair. And then you're also looking at cloud systems. We all are using applications like Office 365. We're using Dropbox, we're using Salesforce, we're using Google, we're using Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services. And we're able to protect all of those systems and think of it as almost like an umbrella over those most important critical assets, and then providing this real-time protections that Pat was alluding to earlier. And really, as soon as something happens, boom, we're able to recognize it and go ahead and block it and prevent these worst case scenarios. And that's what we're providing with ITS Secure. All right, so let's talk through leadership considerations. Pat, maybe you can go through that.
Yeah, so I'd encourage people to, when they're thinking about cybersecurity, don't focus on technology, focus on the outcomes, right? And there's a few different ways of looking at this, but really when you look at what's happening today and what is going to be happening in the next few years, it's all about these two bullets here. Making sure you keep your systems operational, they're not getting encrypted, they're not getting locked up, and make sure your information is remaining confidential. It boils down to that, right? If you can with confidence say you have those two things, you are resilient. Now, it gets a bit complicated because you need to think about, okay, how can we do that 24/7, 365, right? Can we achieve that in-house, or do we need to consider a third party? It's increasingly about getting third party help. Only the very largest organizations will do their own in-house security operations center to get that 24/7. And finally, before heading off, like before continuing your cybersecurity journey, it might be worth getting a sense of where you are today. You know, it you can have a third party like ITS come in, and help you understand, where you are strong and where there is room for improvement.
Yeah, it's really like companies benefit from having an impartial review of their current level of exposure and risk. So at least they can make actionable and prioritized decisions. Because oftentimes you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know what you're currently facing, then it's kind of hard to protect that stuff. In order to protect your infrastructure and your systems and your network, you have to know what you have first. And a lot of companies don't even have a very clear understanding of what information devices and systems they have under their kind of computing infrastructure. So being able to identify those things and have a brushstroke understanding of, here's my most at risk systems. This is where I house my most important information. And if that were to get compromised, it would be an existential threat to my business. I want to make sure that we have appropriate level of controls over those systems. But if you don't have a clear understanding of what the lay of the land is, it's kind of hard to understand that. So that's what Pat is referring to. So as a next step, for attendees of this conversation, you can go ahead and scan that QR code, and we'd be happy to provide you guys with a free risk assessment to understand just what is the lay of the land. And at that point, you have a clear understanding of what your current gaps are, where your vulnerabilities lay, and then at that point, you can make clear, rational decisions about improvements that you might need to make and investments you might need to make in order to protect your systems and protect your data and your companies and your clients' information. So with that, you can email us at secure@itsasap.com. You can go ahead and scan that QR code, and it'll just lead to a link where we can go ahead and schedule some time to have a conversation. Happy to do that. So I guess with that, we're kind of wrapping things up here. Happy to answer any questions. If anybody wants to put any in the chat there, a couple that I can kind of get started with. In the meantime, maybe Pat, like, how does a company kind of determine, what's worth mitigating? Where should I invest? What sort of risks should I accept? How do companies make that? How does that calculus work? Maybe you can talk through that a little bit.
Right. Yeah, that's it depends on the business to some extent. You can have some larger businesses that don't hold, as an example, hold much in the way of sensitive data, whereas a small legal firm or a small medical office might actually hold a whole bunch of sensitive information. So understanding what you're holding is one important thing, right? Understanding how you're set up is another one, because in a lot of cases we're seeing the big breaches happening at organizations that have what we call technical debt, where they have not been investing in their IT, and so their IT infrastructure gets older and older, and consequently becomes harder and harder to keep secure, right? But you know, there's a few different things you can do. Like, obviously, you can get in that third party help to help you see um, where you're strong and where those gaps are. You can do things like tabletop exercises to help management understand. Oh, if we got breached, here's what we would do, right? Like, a lot of places don't have a plan in place. We all have plans to evacuate our buildings in the case of fire. We don't have these incident response kind of plans. And Rob saw this firsthand, I know, where some of these dealerships had those plans, and some car dealerships didn't, and it was night and day in terms of their ability to recover, right?
Yeah, I would say that the majority did not, unfortunately. They're really flying by the seat of their pants and going back to pen and paper. And really, it was a pretty impactful couple of weeks for those folks. And I would say there's
Right.
the vast majority of the dealerships out there.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of our members, or we're dealing with credit information, right? Credit data, especially if we're doing the decisioning on our own. So consumer data, credit data, our members are definitely, susceptible to those types of breaches. And one of the reasons I thought this was an important topic was because of that, right? I mean, and it only takes one time to have something happen. And then it's just not like you guys talked about the stress, potential loss, even if you have insurance, but then it's the reputation. of your organization. So, I talk about this a lot where, yeah, you may be covered, you got insurance, whatever, but it's the reputational damage that's being done because now you're looked at as somebody that can't keep my information secure. So reputational harm is a big part of it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, again, building that trust takes time, and having this kind of an event occur erodes and eliminates that trust in one fell swoop
Right.
oftentimes. And that
Yeah.
creates like just a lot of difficulty post event, to how do you rebuild that trust? How do you go ahead and rebuild the client base? Because folks at this point are becoming more adept and researching more and more about like, hey, I want to deal with a company that really is going to manage my information in a secure way, because there's been so many cyber threats over the past couple of years. Just it's becoming one of those things that people want to make sure that their data is being housed by somebody that's respecting that information and making sure that they're protecting it appropriately.
Yeah, we recently had a data breach within our industry. Don't need to mention names because it happens to a lot of different industries. But
For sure. Yeah.
what I found was once that information gets public that there's a data breach, it's not just other partners that you might be, other vendors you may be working with. I was what because I have a Google alert that alerts me to, and I would actually advise people to do this, putting your company name, your name into Google Alerts so that you can find out what's being talked about on out there on the web, right? Because it'll search all these different locations. But Reddit, if people are familiar with Reddit, um, there was a lot of discussion about, gosh, this breach, and these were consumers that were talking about this, right? I'm watching this and I'm like, oh my gosh, because they're like, these companies need to be sued, they need to be put out of business, and there's nothing worse than social um, social media um, discussion, right? You can't control that. So if this happens to one of our members, this happened to a big company. They can weather that storm. If it happens to one of our members, it is not going to end well. And it could put one of our members out of business if this happened because you're not going to be able to recover like some of these other companies can.
Very true. Cool. Well, I guess with that, I guess if there's no other questions, we can kind of start wrapping things up. And, Terry, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the memberships here. And, feel free to drop us an email at secure@itsasap, or go ahead and scan that link and be happy to help anybody out that wants to have a conversation about things.
Rob and Patrick, I have one quick question. This is PJ from the Bancorp. Do you work with insurance agents? Like, is that is that like a good referral source for you? Like insurance agents that provide insurance to protect their customers. This way, they can refer you guys to them, so they are actually protected and not paying claims out.
Yeah, we do actually. I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat there. I'll go ahead and put in the link for the risk assessment.
And we'll get this out to everybody too, Rob.
Yeah, and please feel free to reach out to me, PJ, there, and happy to have a conversation with you on this side.
Okay.
Or just one note on cybersecurity insurance. We didn't talk about it too much here, but like when that was a new thing, it was pretty easy to get cybersecurity insurance. The insurers really didn't know what they were doing,
Right.
and they paid for it. And guess what? They learned. And now, for you to get a renewal or to get cyber security insurance going, um, you're going to get asked a whole bunch of questions at a minimum. You're going to have to attest to doing a number of things. And if you get stung and then go to file a claim and you haven't done what you said you were doing, the claim will not be honored, right? That's just business, right? So they are becoming more demanding. The flip side of that, though, PJ, is typically insurers are going to offer lower premiums to people that they feel are better protected.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot more claim denials these days. Unfortunately, we're starting to see class action lawsuits in the automotive space as well. You've had a couple of dealerships that have gotten compromised, class action lawsuits against them. There's one I can name in Nevada where that ruling just came down. 1,000 customer records were compromised, $6,000 per record, $6 million fine for a single rooftop dealership. Largely, and that's not including any of the other fees and related costs related to that cyber event. And then you have, I think there's another 15 or 20 class action lawsuits across the country right now that are currently in deliberation for others. And there's some very large dealership groups that are being sued. And you're going to start seeing some really large fines coming down the pike pretty soon. And I think that hopefully is going to start to shift the mindset in the automotive industry, because I think they've been kind of slow to adopt cybersecurity protections, generally speaking.
Mhm.
And hopefully, I thought CDK would hopefully start to change mindsets. It kind of looked like that for maybe a couple of months, and then it kind of just dropped back down again. And so I think we're back to kind of close to where we were before. But, what do dealerships understand and automotive folks understand? They understand money and they don't want to lose it. And once they start getting sued, they'll start hopefully investing and doing the right things. Because at this point, this stuff is not going away, and it's just increasing in frequency, impact, and the risk is just getting higher.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I guess with that, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody's time. And then Terry, appreciate the opportunity, and happy to follow up with any other subsequent conversations.
Absolutely. I say it very much, guys.
Very,
Really did.
that was great. Thank you very much.